Welcome into this week's edition of the Recruiting Breakdown. My name is Gerry Hamilton, joined by CJ Vogel. We're actually going to talk a lot of recruiting today, but we're also going to have a little bit of a baseball coaching search update. We're going to talk to Blake Munroe here in a couple of minutes. Before we get to Blake, though, I want to talk to you guys about the sponsor of the Recruiting Breakdown. That is Mark Saunders. When it comes to protecting all your stuff, wouldn't it great that we have one place that protects all of it? Here's some great news, Texas Longhorn fans. Texas All-State agent Mark Saunders is the only insurance agent you'll need to help keep tabs on protection for all your stuff, all of it, everything from your home, car, and boat to your motorcycle, RV, even that ATV if you got one. Call Texas All-State agent Mark Saunders' office today at 512-218-8571. Are you in good hands? You'll be in great hands with the over 35 years of experience that Mark Saunders has at your disposal. Give him a call today, 512-218-8571. Thank you very much to Mark Saunders, Texas All-State agent, for being the sole sponsor of the Recruiting Breakdown. All right, let's bring in our friend Blake Munroe and put him on the spot. Yeah, Blake. Yeah, your first appearance on the Recruiting Breakdown. Congrats. This is like
That's
a bucket.
right.
This has got to be a bucket list for you.
Oh, yeah, like number one, obviously.
Now, you would think. All right, who's going to be the next coach at Texas?
Okay, you really are putting me on the spot, no doubt about it. Man, nothing has really changed from what I reported yesterday up to this morning on Coffee and Football. I continue to hear that it's either Vitello from Tennessee or Schloss from A&M. Personally, I'm leaning more the A&M route, guys. I don't mind saying that. I'm not saying it's for sure that. I'm just saying that's where I'm leaning right now. I do think the biggest news that I've heard is I think an announcement is coming down the pipe very quickly. My guess is within the next 24 hours, no later than Thursday, but it wouldn't surprise me, CJ and Gerry, if we don't hear something tomorrow morning.
Yeah, I think that's kind of falls in line with what we're hearing, CJ. But go ahead. I know you have something you want to get out with Blake.
Yeah, no, Blake, I'm hearing similar thing. I got a text right before we popped on that expect something between Wednesday, Thursday, Friday would be the absolute latest, but I expect it to come much sooner than that. And also looking back at previous hirings from the University of Texas and Chris Del Conte, they don't act too often unless they have a coach in mind. And of course, with the season over now, it makes sense. Of course, should Texas go the route of Vitello or Schlossnagel? I mean, Blake, put it plainly here. How big of a hire would that be for the University of Texas if that is the case?
Yeah, I mean, well, just think, guys, you're pulling one of the two coaches that competed in the College World Series finals, that wrapped up yesterday. So, I mean, that right there is huge in itself. But two of the biggest names in college baseball over the past 5, even in Schloss's case, 10 years. And, I mean, it brings a new energy to the 40 acres, I think, more than anything. It's going to help with recruiting. It's going to help with NIL efforts. It's going to help with a lot of things in areas that I felt that David Pierce kind of, I guess, for lack of better terms, just didn't do well in, especially there at the end. We saw a downward trend with Pierce, and I think this is, that both of those guys have what ails you when it comes to that. I mean, in fact, I heard even before we recorded this that it could help with some big prospects in baseball and possibly even two-way players in football and baseball, as both of you smiling, you know who I'm talking about. But, I think that you can't go wrong with either hire. They're both great baseball coaches. They're both great recruiters. They both get the students, the fans, the players, even more importantly, behind them, which, as I said, is going to help with NIL. So, yeah, it's a grand slam, no pun intended, for a baseball coach hire. No doubt about it.
Look, I got bad news for Coach Sark. If it happened to be Schloss, he immediately becomes the most popular coach on campus because he ditched A&M to come to Texas. So, no offense, Coach Sark. Just know what's in front of you. If it is the guy up in College Station, that you immediately get knocked down to number 2, at least until the first games, at least until you beat Michigan in Ann Arbor. Because if a guy walks from A&M and takes the Texas job, that puts him number 1 at least for a while, guys.
And not only that, guys, but both of those coaches give you that instant familiarity with the SEC. I mean, they both played SEC schedules. They know the ins and outs by now of that. And with Texas moving there in what, 6 days, something like that. I mean, you got to be ready for it. So that in itself is huge.
Yeah, 100%. I got one more question for you, Blake. When it comes to Texas and, the world of NIL, obviously these guys coming in, is expected that now the conversation is about, maybe that volume of money getting increased even more in terms of Texas baseball there?
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of Texas fans are going to argue with me on this, but Texas is behind in NIL when it comes to baseball. No, I'm not saying other sports, but when it comes to baseball, they're not up there. And I know my shirt's a prime example. LSU's at the top because of that right there. But Arkansas, even Florida, not so much Vandy anymore, but a lot of those schools are head and shoulders above where Texas needs to be. And either one of those are going to help you get there a lot quicker than where Texas was currently trending as of a week ago. No doubt about it.
Last one from me. Of course, if it is Schlossnagle out of Texas A&M, and that kind of creates a domino effect, Blake, is that something that Texas A&M has started to look around for? Is it something that could leave them behind the 8 ball now that this season's over? Do they have a guy in mind? Have you heard anything about what could be a potential search for Texas A&M or a potential search for Tennessee at the moment?
Yeah, if I was an Oklahoma fan, I'd be worried. Let's just say that.
There you go. There you go. All right, so there you go, Blake. I just broke all the news. Thank you, Blake, for that breaking news. All right, Blake, we're going to let you go get back to watching Colt swing the bat or something, man. So thank you very much your bucket list achieved. So now whatever's next, it's going to have a hard time measuring this. If you haven't been to the Grand Canyon before, it's not as good as this. So
this is
no need to waste the money. Yeah, no need to waste the money. You've already reached the pinnacle. All right, that's Blake Munroe of On Texas Football. All right, Blake, talk to you later.
Thanks, Blake.
Yeah, so obviously that was interesting that Blake brought up a football prospect. I'll say this. I touched base with Jonah Williams, and I will just say that it would intrigue him. I'll say that. It would intrigue him.
Well, that should intrigue Texas, Gerry.
I mean, so let's just see what happens. I don't know. I don't know on that. But all right, well, let's just hit the recruiting trail now. And what we're going to do for people today is kind of break down some decision timelines. Before we do that, let's set this up, CJ. 12 commitments in the fold. As you're about to point out, Texas is ahead of schedule as far as building out the class versus the last couple of classes. Kind of take us through that, and then we're going to give everybody a rundown of the commitment dates we know or in the area code of when we think some of these guys are going to commit.
Yeah, right now we've seen Texas from 2022 to 23 to 24, and now to here. They kind of sit anywhere from that 11 to 15 range entering the middle of July. Of course, right now, Texas with 3-4 weeks to go before we hit that time in the cycle. They sit at 12 commitments right now. We expect Texas to take a bit of a larger class in comparison to what we saw in 2024 when they took 22 commitments. Of course, right now, 12 already in the fold. They're ahead of schedule. We're about to go over some of these decision dates coming up. But at this point where we saw Texas really make its run in June to July in 2022, they had 13 commits then. A lot of guys kind of headlined by, Cole Hudson, Connor Robertson. They committed on the same day, early July. That really helped get that process going in 2023. I believe they had 4 commitments on the same day, like July 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. Right that first week of July, you really saw things going. It was on a Sunday. I remember because I was at the horse track, and that was tough to get some articles up then. So, but again, last year, 12 commitments, middle of June. They did a lot of work in 2024. Later on with some flips, of course. They got the nucleus, and then they started pursuing heavier on Brandon Baker, Colin Simmons, Ryan Wingo. They earned 1 commitment from the 3 of them from October into August, September, October, going into the months later on. Of course, 4 late additions to the class in December as well. Texas right now with 12 commits in the fold. Over the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, by the middle of July, you can expect to see that number rise, I would say, probably a good handful.
Yeah, and that 23 class was a little different because after Arch Manning committed, offensive linemen started pouring in, right? I mean, Kyle Flood had to choose which he had to set up different call times at that point as guys wanted to jump in the boat after Arch Manning committed. All right, so let's go through this because we have some dates, tentative dates, scheduled dates, and then we have some area codes we think some guys are going to commit in. All right, let's start. Friday coming up is Josiah Sharma. It's needless to say, this is a big one for Texas. This is Texas or Alabama. I think Oregon's running third. I think Oregon had a great visit, but I expect this to come down to Texas and Alabama as of today on Tuesday. These things can always change. I think there's a chance the mom may move either to Arlington, back to the Arlington area where she did once live when Josiah was, I believe, in 5th and 6th grade, or 6th and 7th, one of the two. Or she can move to Birmingham if Josiah goes to Alabama. What we haven't heard is she's moving to Eugene or Portland. Right. So that's tough ass for Portland and Oregon right there. So we think it's going to be Texas or Alabama. Then this weekend could be, I mean, look, it could be any time this week, but leaning this weekend's Aiden Andy. That would be interesting out of Ruston. Texas, Miami with, Arkansas and TCU also getting a visit. So those two, I think, are maybe the next two to come come off the board unless somebody changes the date. But CJ, one I want to hit you on, July 1st, July 2nd is very interesting. Smith-Orogbo, Hastings, Marco Jones, San Ramon, Danville. What's interesting about that is they're both edges. Right. And we think Texas has a decision to make there on who you're pushing harder this week leading up to that announcement. So those two, Josiah Sharma is going to steal the headlines, but those two are very interesting from a recruiting class standpoint at the edge position.
Yeah, it is. And I know with Smith-Orogbo specifically, there's a lot of buzz about Texas Tech. I don't necessarily believe them to be the school to watch closer here. I look a little bit north, maybe to Oklahoma as the two teams, or the team that Texas should be looking at. Those are the two teams, Texas and Oklahoma, right now that I think this decision will come down to. Oklahoma just, hosted him for an official visit this past weekend. They also just took a commitment from Weatherford edge, 6'6" CJ Nixon, who is recruited as an athlete, but long-term kind of projects more towards the edge position. That, of course, comes after Max Granville ended up at Penn State, also at Oklahoma that weekend as well. So a lot of falling dominoes right now on the Oklahoma board, whereas you look at it from Texas, that July 1st and 2nd will give you an idea of where things fall. Right. Again, I think Oklahoma's pushing for him. I question how much they're pushing for him right now, which leads to me to believe Texas will be coming a little bit harder over this final week of June into that July 1st decision date. And again, it wouldn't surprise me, Gerry, if he ends up in the Texas class, but right now it feels a little bit open for a guy that's expected to commit in the next week.
Yeah, well, what'll be interesting is if he comes out with a top three before his announcement, is Washington and Texas Tech not? That'll be interesting to see. Then Marco Jones, how big is the USC push now with Isaiah Gibson, the 5-star from Warner Robins, having decommitted, now committed to Georgia as expected? That was Michigan or Texas for Marco Jones. So which way is Texas going to go? All right, so we're through that. Then I think July 4th through 6th area, I think Cade Phillips, I think Nathan Tillman, Cade Phillips, the corner/safety out of Hightower. I think Texas is in a good spot over LSU there. Nathan Tillman, the safety out of Mansfield Timberview, same high school that produced Andre Kojo, and then 2025 D lineman Dylan Battle, who's probably an LSU lean. But Nathan Tillman, I think Texas, TCU, Utah, there with Texas being in a pretty good position. Then, it gets to an area where we may not have lockdown dates, but we have area code. So July 8th or 10th will be Nick Townsend and Tanook Hines. Those are going to be interesting. We think Texas is in a good spot for Nick Townsend over Texas A&M with Alabama, maybe even falling the third, or USC, and USC is the fourth team. But Tanook Hines, more of a wild card. Notre Dame, visited Baylor. We don't think it's Baylor. Visited Notre Dame, which has been on the list. USC is interesting because his brother plays at Hawaii, and then there's Texas. He's scheduled to talk to Sark this week. How hard of a push does Texas make closing this one out if they do?
Yeah, that'll be interesting, right? We've talked about wide receiver timelines from Khalid Lockett leading up to DeCorian Moore and Jamie French, right? But for guys like Kelshawn Johnson and Tanook Hines, who we're kind of starting to see things come together for maybe a final 2 and obviously a decision date for Tanook Hines. What does that mean for them in their position on the Texas big board? Of course, that final visit for Notre Dame with Tanook Hines, that looms large going into this dead period into July. Again, I feel like Texas at the wide receiver spot feels really good about 2 guys. We've mentioned that a few times as well, Gerry. That's DeCorey Moore, Jamie French as well. What else happens with those timelines of a Jamie French and a Kelshawn Johnson with Tanook Hines obviously set to decide any time after that first week after the 4th of July?
Yeah, that'll be interesting. And then Kelshawn Johnson will decide before July 11th. That is when we expect that decision before July 11th. So we'll see there. That's probably A&M slightly over Texas still, but he has not made a decision. We do think Mike Elko, Steve Sarkisian are talking to him this week once again. Then you get in to if Josiah Sharma picks Texas, if Texas suddenly has some momentum on D-line, then you get into areas where we don't have dates, but we think in the next 2.5 weeks, DJ Sanders will announce his decision. We think that's Texas over Michigan right now. Myron Charles, total dogfight, Texas, Florida State. Florida State doesn't have the confidence they had 2 months ago or even a month ago. I'll say that right now. Then you have Brandon Brown, who will announce his final decision. Yes, he's committed to Texas, but when you take visit, you still have to make an announcement. I'm shutting it down. I'm staying where I'm at. Or, oops, sorry, I'm decommitting. I'm going to LSU. I think Brandon Brown is Texas or LSU. I know Oklahoma tried to make a pitch. Their pitch may have been to hurt Texas as much while also making a positive pitch for themselves. That attempt, and then Tennessee, Rodney Gardner never gives up on guys he wants, and he wants Brandon Brown because Brandon Brown's underrated. But we think that'll be Texas or LSU still. Myron Charles, we talked about that. Then the interesting thing, what you said about receivers, CJ, we need to go back to. The feeling right now I'm getting is Kalik Lockett will come off the board before DeCorey Moore or Jamie French. Now, that doesn't mean these colleges don't know who they're getting, and the kids don't know who's going where behind the scenes or where it's likely they're going. But I think Kalik Lockett will come off the board as of right now before DeCorey Moore, and obviously Jamie French is August 30th. So these timing things are so interesting because I do think if Kalik Lockett drops a top 3, Texas will be in it.
Yep.
With Alabama, maybe Florida State, maybe outside shot A&M. If he drops the final 2, it wouldn't shock me if it's not Texas and somebody, even if he's not going to Texas. So that's what's going to be interesting. But I think Kalik Lockett's going to come off the board first unless things change.
I've got a question for you before we continue this wide receiver conversation. Back to the defensive line, and we talked about maybe a few decisions coming up before we hear from Brandon Brown. Should those go in the favor of the Longhorns, you get some of that momentum, especially from a big target out west, to come into Texas and put that trust in Kenny Baker. Would that momentum have any sway in a possible this final decision for Brandon Brown to stay in the class, or is it just completely wild card where, hey, it's either I stay with Texas or, hey, Bo Davis is the guy that put his trust in me beforehand?
CJ, I think that's actually a damn good point because, look, the reality is Brandon Brown's committed to Texas. I think Brandon likes the idea of playing at Texas. I think there's still some people that are pro Bo in his corner, in his circle that have been there through Bo's 1.5 to 2 years recruiting this kid, especially when other people were questioning his size. So I think there's that and the belief in his ability to develop Brandon. But it's a really good question, CJ, because what if Sharma went Texas way Friday, and then the following week Myron Charles said, you know what I'm into? We had a great visit together at Texas on the 7th through 9th, and we're tandem this thing. And then DJ Sanders jumps in. That's a better message for Bo Davis with Brandon Brown.
That's also
– people would say, oh, no, that's great momentum. Brandon will stay in the class. Well, this is recruiting. So what is LSU going to have?
Who knows? Yeah.
You're going to have Zion Williams, but is he the only one in their class at that point in time? I think it's a great question, CJ.
So we'll see. Of course, I mean, defensive tackle, wide receivers, those positions to me really interesting when it comes to timelines and how that momentum starts to build. Of course, as we expect, obviously, Jamie French to carry it all the way out through August. DeCorey Moore is a guy that we are certainly expecting to make a decision near the start of the season, probably right beforehand as well. So it's going to drag out a little bit. Of course, you look back to last year, Who else from Duncanville made a decision in the month of August? Well, that was 5-star Colin Simmons. So it lines up for Reginald Samples' kids to make decisions prior to, some of these big 5-star guys that they have to make a decision prior to their senior season.
Yeah, and in talking to a source on DeCorian on Monday, there's 2 points to that to make. DeCorian, and I agree with you, I think it'll be, I think Duncanville want it to be a big ceremony, set it up, because you're going to have local TVs, you're going to have all the people in our recruiting industry wanting to live stream it and be there. So it's hard to just do an edit as the number 1 receiver in the country and walk away, right? There's not many guys who pull off the Archman, I'm committed to Texas, bye. So that's the, I don't think that's going to happen. So that would probably push a decision for an announcement for him late July, early August, because school starts the 13th, practice starts a little bit before that, right? So that would follow a similar timeline. Now, DeCorian is different from – I think Colin wanted that. I think he wanted that decision I think he wanted that experience with his mom and his brother. I think DeCorian's a little more low-key in that way as far as announcements go. Remember, he popped the YouTube LSU commitment, and there wasn't much fanfare with that. But that's why I've always thought, okay, you can't make your final one that way. The other thing I picked up is once he announces his decision, that's it. The process is over. He will only visit the school for games that he commits to. I was point blank told that Monday. So when DeCorian Moore announces this decision, and we think Texas remains in a good spot over Ohio State and Oregon and LSU, that it's final. It's done. All right, so let's then look at a couple other positions. Oh, on DB, Dorian Brew, no date yet on that. We'll see if Texas or USC can beat out Ohio State there. But let's look, 2 positions left. Linebacker, very interesting. We don't really have dates from Madden Faramo or Riley Pettijohn or Jonathan Cunningham. But we do know Faramo had a great visit to Texas. Okay, I actually got to think about this between Notre Dame and Texas. That's how all the visits are hyped, but this isn't us hyping it. This is what the kid said and what we heard behind the scenes before the kid even spoke. This is a real decision now. This is not I visited, man, I'm going to Notre Dame. It was fun. No, they actually have a decision to make. So Texas did a good job. Riley Pettijohn, Texas, Ohio State, A&M. We'll see where that one comes out. Jonathan Cunningham, Texas or Utah, unless Kansas pulls an upset. We think Texas would ideally want 3 linebackers in the class. They have Elijah Barnes. Can they get 2 more of the 3 is the question. And we don't know when those guys are announcing yet.
Yeah, no, listen, I don't see a world in which Texas goes 0-2 with Madden Faramo and Riley Pettijohn. It just, with the way that this class is shaken up right now, you have your top guy one of your top guys on the board right now with Elijah Barnes in the class. You're looking to pair him up with what could be a very special linebacking group in this class. I just don't see it. Texas is going to play that game with Riley Pettijohn. I know Texas A&M made some noise. Ohio State's felt confident coming into this official visit month as well. Hey, he had a good visit on campus as well. And Sarkisian and Johnny Nansen have been all over this recruitment dating back to his hiring early this winter. So he's been up to McKinney several times to see him in person, whether it be workouts, practices, or just hang out at school. To me, there's a lot of history there. And, of course, if that's the guy that Texas wants to push for and get in the class, I have a hard time, again, seeing them whiff on both Madden Faramo and Riley Pettijohn at this moment.
Talk about the younger Pettijohns at McKinney, because I think that's interesting. He has a sister that's going to FAMU who's going to be a freshman at FAMU. That's why I think Florida State was in the picture for a while. Talk about the younger Pettijohns coming up at McKinney and how they could factor in.
Yeah, definitely. He has 2 cousins up there right now. One's a 26 linebacker and the other's a 27 linebacker. So linebackers kind of run in the fold. They got that in their genes right now, Gerry. But interestingly, I think their only camp visit this summer was actually to Texas A&M on June 4th. So Texas A&M went that kind of family route to get everybody, all the Pettijohns on campus, allow them to understand what it was like at Texas A&M, meet the coaches. Obviously, Elko and staff were able to shake hands and, kind of take that route as well. But, hey, Texas is only 3.5 hours away from McKinney. So if they want to come see Riley in person and make that trip back up, it's a similar trip there, but they're certainly starting their recruiting world as well. I'm not sure yet where they are on big boards or anything, but Texas A&M made that first step out to go see them.
But, yeah, and family members there that are coming up at McKinney High. All right, last thing we're going to talk about, And before I get to offensive line, because I mean Kyle Flood generally gets the July off at this point in his recruiting. Him and Deshard Torch is like, what are the rest of you guys doing, man? We're going to the beach. All right, we're going to take another second for Mark Saunders. When it comes to protecting all your stuff, wouldn't it be great to have one place that protects absolutely all of it? Here's some great news. Texas All-State agent Mark Saunders is the only insurance agent you'll need to help keep tabs on protection for all your stuff. That's everything from your home, your car, and boat to your motorcycle, RV, and even that ATV. Call Texas All-State agent Mark Saunders' office today at 512-218-8571. Are you in good hands? You'll be in great hands. I'm talking Gerry Rice hands with the over 35 years of experience that Texas alum Mark Saunders will provide for you. Give him a call today, 512-218-8571. All right, CJ, closing out offensive line. This is going to be interesting. 4 in the boat, 3 guys left for possible 2 spots, 1 or 2 spots. Lamont Rogers, which we think, kind of like Khalil Lockett's going to be the first guy off the board. Mid-July, anytime in July coming up, we think that's going to happen. Is that Missouri, where that's probably the coach he has the best relationship with? No offense to the other guys. Is it A&M, where his father, who lives in Vicksburg, made the visit? FSU, where his father made the visit? Or will it be Texas or Oklahoma? Texas, mom didn't make the visit there, or A&M. Oklahoma, I do believe she went on that trip. But who's that going to be for Lamont Rogers? There's a lot of Missouri buzz with him, but that's a lot of buzz right up until is he going to pick Missouri over these schools is the question. I think that's a very interesting recruitment, CJ. And then before you get to Lamont Rogers, then after that, you have Fasusi, which is late August, Nick Brooks, which is probably early September. So those 2 guys, I think Texas maybe feels the best about Nick Brooks. They know they're in a dogfight with Oklahoma on Fasusi, with A&M still swinging. And then Lamont Rogers is kind of a wild card for the reasons I laid out. Dad lives in Vicksburg. Mom lives in Mesquite. They've made some visits, haven't made all the visits. So the college coaches say, we're not sure what's going on here, really.
Yeah, getting parents on the campus, especially for the official visits, that matters. And that's kind of why I was hesitant with Smith Orobo, who made it by himself earlier this month of June. But to the point,
they know you, right? Yes.
So it a little bit surprising there, and it truly puts it onto the kid to say, all right, I know where I want to go. The relationships matter, education, yada, yada. You understand. It's all on the kids whenever that's the case. For the offensive linemen, I mean, I look at it in this sense. I think Michael Fasusi has kind of turned more – it's kind of pivoted from a Texas A&M battle to a Texas-Oklahoma battle. Oklahoma's using that Bill Beatonball relationship and development factor at Oklahoma in their corner. Kyle Flood, again, he's had great history of development elsewhere. He's just put 1 guy in the league at Texas. Again, not his fault. Only 1 guy has been eligible really to enter the NFL, and he did. But that's their big selling point. They brought out everybody, that's current players, that's staffers, that's Brent Venables, that's Beatonball. Everybody was out, all hands on deck whenever he was in Norman earlier this month. And then Nick Brooks, interesting one as well. And you've mentioned it. It's probably Texas and Georgia right now, Gerry. Texas in a top 2 unofficially for Nick Brooks and Michael Fasusi right now. Pretty interesting, again, when you consider what might be the bigger wild card of the bunch deciding beforehand on the timeline at the moment in Lamont Rogers.
There you go. All right, that's CJ Vogel. I'm Gerry Hamilton. That's going to do it for this week's edition of Recruiting Breakdown. Thank you to Blake Munroe for the baseball coaching search update. Thank you to Mark Saunders for being the sole sponsor of the Recruiting Breakdown. And we'll talk to you again next Tuesday. How many commitments will Texas have? I think they'll probably have more than 12. We'll see. All right, that's CJ. I'm Gerry. Talk to you tonight, Longhorn Livestream.